Hello everyone, this is Irina. This is my little YouTube channel on Norse mythology, Vikings and Germanic stuff in general. I also have a TikTok where you can find shorter videos now. Just have to look in the description to find it. And if you like the topics I talk about, a like and subscribe would be very helpful. So today I'm going to rant a little bit about a topic which I've been thinking about sometimes, but now I've been thinking about more because of the new Vikings Valhalla season 2. I haven't even seen season 1. I must confess I'm not really a big fan of the series. I tried watching I think the first and the second from the first series, so the original Vikings from the History Channel, but I quit because I cannot put up with this kind of representation of Vikings as a biker gang. It was too much for me, I think, and I couldn't take it at face value as a simply fantasy, series, because it has been promoted all over again as a historical series or a what is it called now, a docudrama or something like that. At least it's on Netflix now, so they let go the historical part, or at least pretending that it is historical. But anyway, in this series, as far as I've understood, there is a character who is Frøydis Eiríksdóttir, and she's a shieldmaiden. And this reminded me of that very, let's say, controversial topic of women in the Viking Age being warriors. Was that a real thing? Now, Frøydis is a shield maiden. That is true. If you read the saga of the Greenlanders, you're going to find her fighting people, killing people. She tells some men that they are not manly enough, and then she goes on to exert revenge on some people herself. She even scares the natives she encounters there by cutting off one of her breasts. It's a character which we can talk about as being badass, as the terminology goes nowadays. But let's remember that we are talking about a saga. Yeah, so sagas were written in the Middle Ages. So they were written long after the Viking Age. And the problem with the sagas is that they tend to romanticize a lot of things. So they can be useful from a literary point of view. At any rate, they can be useful. Also historical, from a historical point of view, but you always have to corroborate the pieces of information you find there with pieces of information you find in other written sources, more contemporary ones, and archaeological sources, and so on. So that's a big problem with the sagas. She's not the only one. Yeah, so many shield maidens, or as they're called in Old Norse, skjaldmer, because shield maiden is the translation, English translation of skjaldmer. We have from the so-called fornafrasögur, which are the sagas of the ancient times. So Frøydis appears in one of the sagas of the Icelanders. But many characters we have from the sagas of ancient times. So these are sagas which are very adventurous, and they retell stories about semi-mythical heroes, most of them living a few centuries before they were written, a few good centuries before they were written, so during the migration period of the Germanic peoples. We have, for example, Gudrun in the saga of the Volsungs, who, for example, fights against Atlin, so that would be Attila, with her brothers. We have Aslaug, yeah, so Ragnar Lothbrok's second wife, who actually leads an army to avenge the sons of Ragnar from his previous marriage. And we also have Hervor from the saga of Hervor and Heidrek, who is really a badass character because, among other things, she goes to her father, her undead father's burial mound, her father Angantyr, and she claims the sword, the magical sword, Tyrfing. So that's pretty cool. She acts like a warrior, but it's also noteworthy that at the end of the story, she goes back to her, let's say, more traditional role. So definitely women in sagas, at least, women acting like men, or what is traditionally perceived as a manly thing to do, were not regarded in a bad way. On the contrary, sometimes we also find them endowed with the characteristic dranger. So dranger meaning manly. So it was the best thing anyone could have told you you were in the Viking Age, at least, from the information we have in the sagas. The question is whether these sources provide enough pieces of evidence so that we can say, Viking warrior women were a thing at the time. We also have some hints in some Irish chronicles. For example, if you go to the War of the Irish with the Foreigners, that's a source from the 12th century. That's also late. Yeah, so the Viking Age was between, let's say, the end of the 8th century and 1066. We are going to find a list with some warriors, some chieftains leading the armies raiding the British Isles and Ireland. And on this list, you will find Ingenreid. Hope I pronounced it right. Ingenreid, the Red Girl. So maybe a woman was one of the leaders of these companies. Could be, but then again, it might have also been a man, because Vikings tended to use such derogatory terms for men who were not according to their own standards, would not live up to their standards of masculinity. If you read the mythological poems, for example, you will find, for example, Loki mocking Odin for being a woman because he practices magic, among other things. Or you also find an instance of Thor cross-dressing, and again, he's being mocked. So this Red Girl could have just been like a really mean nickname for a man, a leader. We don't really know. Then again, we have Saxo Grammaticus. He also mentions a couple of characters, Rusla, for example, and also Lagertha, or Hladgarder in her Norse name. Then again, Saxo Grammaticus, is an author who might have made a lot of stuff up. He wrote in Latin. His sources are a little bit controversial as well. And it's his opinion, his understanding of a society which he didn't really have much direct contact to, one might say. So I don't know really what to make from these literary sources. It's one thing to say that, okay, these are instances of women that could have been involved in war on occasions when the circumstances demanded it, and it's a different thing to imagine, like I've seen in Vikings. I don't even remember what season it was. Anyway, it doesn't matter. Like I've seen in Vikings, a group of women being trained by other women, and they also were connected to this cult of the goddess Freya. So I personally don't think that was a thing. Like, if you define a warrior as, a professional swordsman taking part regularly in such campaigns, I don't think that was the case. There is in archaeology the now famous, I guess, grave from Birka in Sweden, which was re-examined in 2017. In this grave, it is assumed that the goods actually belonged to a woman. For a very long time, it was assumed that the grave belonged to a man because of the goods, because we have spears, an axe, a sword. Anyway, symbols associated with men, generally speaking. But it was reanalyzed using bioarchaeology. They basically looked at the proteins in the tooth enamel, and they came to the conclusion that it was actually a woman. Now, does that automatically mean that this woman was a warrior? Not really, because swords are also symbols of high status in general. doesn't necessarily mean that the person would have taken part in battles, like actively. It could also mean that the swords and other martial goods belonged to her husband, maybe, or another member of the family, and they were put there also in connection to high status, elitist categories of people. So it's very hard to tell whether this is the evidence, the conclusive evidence for women acting like warriors. The grave has some other problems as well. So the bones were really badly labeled because the grave was initially excavated in the 19th century, and the archaeologist who did that labeled the bags pretty poorly, and the boxes, and there are bags tagged with grave numbers that don't really exist elsewhere. So the only connection we have between these bones and the grave is that it matches, these bones tend to match the drawings and descriptions we have from the 19th century. So that is a problem. But let's just say, okay, Birka was a real thing. Let's just say, let's assume for the sake of the argument that this woman was a warrior. Again, this tends to go into the direction of the exception proving the rule, because that's not how we usually find women in this position. It would only mean that sometimes some gender fluidity was allowed, or it wasn't frowned upon. We also have graves of men with brooches in them. Yeah. So, of course, that's not to assume that, you know, men and women could interchange traditional roles between each other and everything was fine and it was an open-minded society and so on. No, that's not the case. It's not the contemporary world. We tend to transfer a lot of the modern values that we have into the past nowadays. We want to see these shield maidens in the past. Yeah, we want to have these models of strength and independence also in the past, particularly in the Viking Age, due to the large amount of popular culture promoting this type of images. But as much as I personally want to believe that as well, I don't really think that was something which we can classify as a role women could take in any context. I think it's circumstantial. So, like I said before, when the circumstances demanded it, remember that we are living in a hard time. Yeah, so you could be attacked by a bear. Even if you were a woman, you had to fight back. So, yeah, of course, women could have used weapons. That's perfectly reasonable. But that's not to assume that women formed some sort of trained group taking part in wars like men did. I would not really go that far. Of course, there are some who are going to bring up the idea of the valkyries as an extra argument, but valkyries are mythological beings. They are mythological beings, and there is some kind of conflation with the Amazons there in the image, and their main role was actually not the fight. It was to collect the fighters who were dead on the battlefield. It says it in the name, yeah? Val means, Valor is a term used for a slain warrior in battle, and Kyria is the one choosing. So they were the ones who chose the warriors. Yeah, so the thing is that we shouldn't try to romanticize too much these things or try to transfer our own ideas into the past. On the other hand, I also find this obsession with finding women warriors in the past a little bit exaggerated, because women had many other important, absolutely essential roles in society. We're going to find a lot of graves with stuff like spindle wools. And this shows us how important textile production was at the time. Okay, you could go to war, but if you did not have appropriate clothes to bring you through the winter, you wouldn't have survived. It was absolutely essential work, textile production. And I don't know if you've ever tried it. I haven't. I don't want to. But it's really hard work. Really hard. It's not something you learn in a week. Yeah, so this is one type of activity which was absolutely essential for the good functioning of society. And we have hundreds of pieces of evidence for this, like these ones here from Gotland, the island of Gotland. Spindle wheels and shafts. Other than textile production, women were also essential in taking care of the household. They could also take over the business of a husband who was dead. So I think, to my mind, that is also an important role in society, you know. And there were women, for example, we have examples from the rune stones, commissioning important stuff, infrastructure stuff, for example, like bridges. Yes, we have this one here, for example, the Duna rune stone with Gunvor, I think it was her name, who commissioned the bridge in the memory of her daughter. So let's just not limit ourselves to this particular role, women being warriors, because you have a lot of things which are considered important in society, which should not be dismissed, you know, because every time we use the term women's work, there is this sense of, you know, looking down upon this work because it's allegedly easy. It is not. Yeah, war wasn't the only thing keeping a society together. So yeah, that would be my opinion on the matter. Maybe I will develop it later in a more structured video. If you found some of my ideas interesting, please consider subscribing to my channel. I have a lot more material and a lot more to come. If you have your own opinion on the subject, please feel free to leave me a comment, and thank you very much for watching.